Today's presentation is really to just give a general overview of stress, some of the symptoms of stress, triggers of stress, and then to transition into talking a little bit about sleep, the importance of sleep and how to get better sleep, importantly, if you're not getting good sleep at the moment. So to start off with, we'll talk a little bit about stress. So stress is a normal response to problems in life. Everyone gets stressed from time to time, and I think everyone kind of intuitively knows what stress is when we talk about it. At times, stress can be helpful in that it can be a motivating force for us. Think of an example like being at school, university, or in any area of life where you're examined or you need to sit some sort of assessment. Being a little bit stressed about that, being a bit stressed about not being prepared or not doing well can be motivating for you to actually prepare for the assessment itself. So it can motivate you to be ready. So in that way, it can be a good thing. Although there is a point at which stress can become problematic. It's usually thought that a little bit of stress is a good thing because it serves as a motivator, as I said. But when it starts to get more and more intense and then it starts to become more overwhelming, or it starts to disrupt your physical health, your relationships, or your work, that's usually when we would start to think of intervening to do something about stress, because at that point it's not really serving you so much anymore. So what is stress? Stress is associated with a number of different types of symptoms. So there are physical symptoms that a person can experience when they're stressed. And they won't experience all of these symptoms necessarily, but they may experience some of them, including sleep problems, aches and pains like headache, upset stomach. Some people can get rashes or hot flushes, things like that. Chest tightness is another common stress symptom. People can be more likely or vulnerable to getting the flu in that their immunity has been compromised by the stress. Their appetite might change in that they may lose their appetite, or their appetite might increase, so they may eat more or less. And they might notice weight changes as well, so they might put on weight or lose weight. They may feel restless and fidgety and have trouble relaxing or sitting still. And they may notice changes in their blood pressure as well. So the point of this slide is really to emphasize that stress really does affect our body physically. In addition to the physical symptoms, there are also emotional symptoms like mood swings. So a person may notice throughout the day that they experience different types of emotions. They can be up and down, anxious, sad, happy. They can be irritable. Irritability is essentially a low-level type of anger. So a person may notice that they're less tolerant or patient for things. They may be getting a little snappy around people or around tasks and things that are frustrating them. A similar symptom is agitation. So feeling sort of agitated, angry, on edge, snappy. People may get teary, and they may also get anxious or feel anxiety a fair degree of the time as well. Finally, we have behavioral symptoms. So stress affects the body physically, it can also affect us emotionally. And finally, behaviorally. So these are more the outward signs that a person may be stressed. We may notice things like a person or ourselves drinking more alcohol, eating more junk food, smoking more cigarettes. In more extreme cases, the use of drugs can start to happen. We can start to get more adversarial or hostile with people, and this can take the form of physical altercations in an extreme case, or verbal altercations, getting into arguments, snapping at people, and again, in a more extreme case, various forms of self-harm we may see when a person's stressed. So what are the triggers for stress? These are all fairly straightforward, and I'm guessing that they really are what you'd imagine they would be. So anything related to our health, if we have a condition or an injury that causes us pain or disability or medical conditions, clearly that's going to have an effect on our mental health and can cause varying degrees of stress. It can also affect us in terms of our financial security or wealth. So if you're dealing with issues of unemployment, job stress, you may be overworked, you may be working very, very long hours. That could be another example of a stressor that would cause a person to be emotionally affected by that. And finally, relationships. So conflict in relationships would be an obvious stressor. Breakups, clearly, and also loneliness. We are social creatures, so we're not really meant to necessarily be by ourselves for long stretches of time. We sort of evolved and developed in small groups where we were in mostly constant contact with people. So loneliness can be a real stressor for us. So now we've given a bit of just a quick overview of stress. I wanted to go into sleep, some of why sleep's important, and also what you can do to try to get better sleep if you notice that it's been disrupted. Because as we said before, stress affects us in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways it can affect us and affect our lives is through the disruption of sleep. Of course, when we're underslept, that can sort of start or perpetuate a vicious cycle wherein we're stressed, so we're underslept, and we're underslept, which makes it harder to keep a routine the next day. Our moods can go out. We're more likely to struggle in resisting our impulses to go towards junk food or alcohol and other things, which again sort of feeds this cycle of poor sleep and more stress further. So sleep is crucial for physical and mental health, as I'm sure you're probably aware. More and more research is coming out by the day showing the effects of poor sleep on things like body weight. So people who are underslept typically have a much harder time maintaining a sort of lean body mass in terms of losing weight and maintaining a healthy body fat percentage, among a number of other different physical conditions. So sleep deprivation can cause all sorts of things or contribute to all sorts of problematic health conditions, heart disease, diabetes, and so on. There are links now being observed in the research between these two things. Mental health as well, obviously. It only takes one night of poor sleep for anyone to notice the difference in their ability to be emotionally stable and to focus and concentrate and be productive. So sleep's very important. We really need between 7 to 9 hours. Everyone differs in terms of how much sleep they need, but anything less than 7 hours is going to be a problem. And it can actually be demonstrated, it has been demonstrated in research, where if people get less than 7 hours sleep, they're less productive, they're less able to focus, their ability to learn things and remember things is impaired. So anything less than 7 hours is a real problem. And as we said before, stress can really disrupt sleep. It can prevent us from getting to sleep, so we might take a long time to fall asleep. If we fall asleep at all, we might have interruptions. We might wake up throughout the night. And stress can also make people wake up early in the morning and struggle to get back to sleep. So it really affects all stages of sleep. So when we're stressed on top of having stress management skills, it can be good to have skills that are aimed at helping us keep a good sleep routine and get good sleep generally. So usually when I'm working with people trying to get better sleep, I encourage them to think about establishing and maintaining a daily routine of things that they do to get good sleep and a nightly routine of things that they do to get good sleep. The things that I encourage people to do in the day is firstly to try to avoid naps. Usually if you nap, especially for more than say 20 or 30 minutes in the day, that will interfere with your ability to sleep at night. There are reasons for this, and I won't bore you with them, but there are certain chemicals in the brain that get released throughout the day that make us sleepy. If we actually sleep or nap, we interfere with those chemicals, which makes it harder for us to fall asleep later at night. As I say, I won't bore you with it, and to be honest, I don't fully understand the chemicals, and it's not really my thing. But you generally want to avoid naps even if you are sleepy. Number 2, exercise. There are loads of recommendations on how much exercise you should do. The recommendation I go off is to try to get around 90 minutes of moderate intensity per day. That can be in the form of brisk walking, but really any exercise you can do, as long as you're not injuring yourself and you're keeping in mind your physical health and any limitations that you may have, will be good for you. You just sort of want to avoid it in the last few hours of the day, so you're not sort of amping yourself up from exercise before you're trying to sleep. So try to keep it a few hours before you actually try to go to sleep. Okay, the next thing that we want to think about is avoiding stimulants like nicotine and caffeine. So caffeine, very common, coffee, tea, and so on, energy drinks. Caffeine can take up to 12 to 14 hours to actually fully leave your body. So if you're going to bed at midnight and you've had a coffee at 12 in the day, the caffeine may actually still be in your system. So generally speaking, I suggest to people, if they want to take their sleep seriously, to try to avoid caffeine in at least the 12 to 14 hours before you're trying to sleep. So keep your caffeinated coffee to the morning. If you have to drink something later on, make it a decaf. Also noting though that decaffeinated coffee still has caffeine in it. It's just been decaffeinated, but not completely. So there are still trace elements of caffeine in the coffee as well, but it is better than a fully caffeinated drink. Nicotine's the same. So nicotine in the form of cigarettes or patches or any of those other systems is a stimulant, so that can affect your sleep as well. So just be conscious of when you're smoking or when you're using patches, ideally quit altogether. But if you're going to smoke, just be conscious, especially if you want to take note of your sleep when you're actually doing that. I have to double check the amount of time that you could go between sleeping and having your last cigarette, say, but I think it's up to 4 hours. So leave a 4-hour window between the last nicotine you have and sleep to avoid any sort of stimulating effects of the nicotine. Alcohol's a big one. So a lot of people drink alcohol because it sort of sedates them, makes them sleepy and calm. And that's just because of how alcohol affects the brain. And alcohol can help you to put you to sleep. But what will happen is as your body processes the alcohol throughout the night, you'll tend to wake up and it will tend to interrupt your sleep as you go. So although alcohol will put you to sleep, you'll get poorer sleep quality overall the next day. You get poorer sleep quality throughout the night, and the next day you'll tend to feel that. You won't wake up as refreshed and you won't be as rejuvenated. So cutting out alcohol as well, especially if you're having troubles with sleep, I think will help. Bed is for sleeping and sex. It's really common these days to do everything in bed that doesn't involve these two activities, like, for example, watching TV shows, doing work emails, doing work in bed. The problem with that is that the mind or the brain tends to associate these activities with the bed itself. Really what you want to do is just keep the bed just for sleeping, because you want your brain to make that association between the bed and sleep rather than the bed and activity, the bed and emails, the bed and work stress. So just keep the other activities outside the bedroom. Keep your daily routine the same. What a lot of people do when they have trouble sleeping is they start to modify their day the next day. So if they have a poor night's sleep, they may sleep in, or they may go to bed at a different time the next night, or they may change what they're doing the next day for fear that they won't be able to function and so on. The best thing you can do though, if you've had a poor night's sleep, is to try to get up at the same time you would if you'd had a good night's sleep, and go to bed at the same time that you would have on a normal night. Also throughout the day, don't try to change things too much based on having a poor night's sleep, because that can really fuel or reinforce this anxiety that people have about having a poor night's sleep. In other words, sometimes when people struggle to sleep, they worry that their next day will be ruined. And for that reason, they start changing what they're doing the next day to try to prevent bad things from happening. The problem with that is that they'll tend to go to bed that night anticipating and thinking about and worrying about getting a good night's sleep. And as you probably found before, sleep is sort of something that just happens to us when we're not too bothered about it. If you go to bed trying to have a good night's sleep, just the stress of that can make it much harder. So really what you want to do is, if you've had a poor night's sleep, try to get up at the same time, try to go to bed at the same time, and try to do your normal activities, and then see how things go from there. So that's the daily routine. The nightly routine's a little bit different in that it happens at night, but there are also a number of other different activities that I'd encourage you to try. The first thing is to try, this is a bit of an obvious one, but try to ensure that your room is as dark and as quiet as possible. If you need to use eye masks or anything because your room's quite bright for whatever reason, try that. Earplugs are another thing you could try. I personally like white noise, so just some sort of droning sound that sort of cuts out a lot of the environmental noise around you. That can help as well. Research is also coming out to show that temperature actually makes a big difference when it comes to your ability to fall asleep. And it seems that around 17 to 18 degrees Celsius in the room that you're sleeping in can make it easier to fall asleep. Okay, so what I'm going to do for the rest of these examples is to assume that you're going to bed at midnight, and we'll work back from there. So it can be really helpful to have a mindless and relaxing sort of routine that you do in the 1 or 2 hours before bed. So if you're going to bed at midnight, at around 10, you want to start putting away any sort of mentally stimulating, definitely work or anything that's getting you sort of agitated or worked up at all. We want to transition instead to just more mindless and relaxing activities. Before you do this, if there is something that's on your mind or you're worried about something or you've got something you need to do for tomorrow, just actually make a note of that on a to-do list or anything like that, and then make a commitment to yourself to just deal with it the next day, just so you can get these worries and things out of your head and just onto the page. Then you can just transition into doing mindless, relaxing things, reading things, meditation, relaxation exercises. That can be really good. We want to turn the lights out at the same time each night. So in this example, we'll say midnight. But you want to stick to a really strict sleep routine. That's one of the best things you can do to try to get good sleep, is to go to bed at the same time every night, get up at the same time every morning. So this example here, we have you going to bed at midnight. It can also be helpful to turn out a lot of the lights in the hour before bed. Try to turn out or at least dim a lot of the lights at home. You probably find this will actually help you to feel sleepy too. Okay, so it's going to be a tricky one. So if you're getting into bed, as I say, you get into bed at midnight and you're lying there and if the room is fairly dark, you've done relaxing activities, you've avoided nicotine and caffeine and all those other stimulants, but you can't sleep, give it about 20 minutes. You don't need to check your phone or your watch or anything. Just sort of guess at the time. If it feels like it's about 20 minutes, get up out of bed, go to the other room and do something mindless or relaxing. That could be anything like reading, doing a crossword puzzle, just nothing that's too stimulating, just something that helps to focus your mind on something else. And then do that until you start to feel a little tired and then go back to bed. You don't want to sort of lay in bed and try to force yourself to go to sleep. That will tend to just make you feel stressed and it's usually counterproductive. So if you're in bed and it's in about 20 minutes, don't look at the clocks, just get up, go to the other room and do something until you feel tired and then go from there. On a related point, you don't want to watch clocks. A lot of what people do when they can't sleep is that they sort of check watches, phones, or clocks in the room to see how much time they don't have left to sleep before they have to get up. Usually that just makes you more stressed and anxious. Best thing to do is to just get all clocks out of the bedroom, keep your smartphone out of your bedroom, don't take your watches in, and so on. As I said, if you have trouble sleeping, just intuitively feel that it's been about 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be too exact, and then go from there. And finally, we want to sort of set the alarm and get out of bed at the same time each day. So we want to keep the routine the same every day on weekdays and weekends. The example I've given here is of 9 a.m. So you're really, in this example, giving yourself a 9-hour window to sleep in, which according to your genetics and just your body type, you'll tend to fit in there somehow. Over time, you could give yourself a shorter window. If you're waking up refreshed, you could go to bed at 1 and get up at 9, just as long as you're feeling refreshed and you're being consistent with that routine. Medications can be prescribed for sleep problems. They're more of a short-term solution, but they can help in the short term. Apart from that, though, that was all I really wanted to go through. I'm happy to take any questions that we have, and I'm also happy to rewind through these slides if people have any questions about them or anything like that.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. There were so many great practical tips there. I've jotted down quite a few myself, and lots of great ideas in there for all of us. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your expertise in this area. And as you said, I think at the moment, there's lots of reasons we may be struggling to find, ways to fall asleep easily and stay asleep. So I'm sure there's lots here that everyone will be able to get lots out of. Now, if you have a question for Mitchell, as he said, he's really happy to answer. This is your opportunity to ask that. So if there's something you'd like to ask him about stress and sleep, feel free to drop that into the chat box and I will read that out. We've got a few questions that have come through from our community earlier this week, so I might start out with one of those. The first one that I'm going to pull out is, what do you recommend for anyone who falls asleep easily but wakes up very early and can't go back to sleep?
It depends on, fall asleep easily and wake up early but can't go back to sleep. I'd probably ask how long are you sleeping for? So some people are morning people and some people are night people. That is just their body and their genetics are geared more towards going to sleep earlier and waking up earlier, and that's fine. And other people are just geared more towards falling asleep later and getting up later. So if they're waking up really early but they're sleeping between 7 and 9 hours, I don't see a problem with that. I guess it just depends on how long they're sleeping for. If you're getting more than 7 hours and you wake up pretty refreshed at the same time every day, that's a good thing. It would just depend if they're undersleeping or not.
Okay, thanks. I had a question that came through around weighted blankets. I know that I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm getting served a lot of ads at the moment on Instagram for weighted blankets. Wanted to know what your thoughts were on them and whether or not they can be helpful with sleep.
Sort of in line with what I was saying about having like a wind down routine or relaxing and stress-free activities in the 2 hours or so before bed. If you notice that using a weighted blanket is comforting for you, that could help you to sleep. So I'd be all for it. Some people find that weighted blankets actually can help to soothe them and help with their anxiety. So by all means, yeah, if it helps you to relax, it will support sleep. So yeah, I'd encourage you.
And are there any issues? You mentioned a few things in order to help people, kind of achieve that optimal darkness or silence. Are there any issues with people becoming overly attached or dependent on things like, earplugs or eye masks, or do the benefits generally outweigh any negative issues around that?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure. I guess ideally you want to make the room as dark, quiet, and comfortable and cool as possible. Well, the cool is about the 17 to 18 degrees that I mentioned. But making the room as dark, quiet, and cool as comfortable, that's the goal. I guess the question becomes, do these earplugs or things you're listening to in eye masks, do they become a crutch? That's possible, yeah. And I guess the concern there is that in an environment where you don't have those things, you may not sleep as well. But in my mind, if you're sleeping in the same bed 99% of the time and you're using these things and they're helping you to get better sleep, I don't really see a problem with them. Having said that, you could experiment with not using them, or just using them maybe for half an hour and taking them out, just so you get a feel of both. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think I might be a little bit scarred from sleep associations and sleep training as a parent, and definitely trying to get my little ones to sleep over the years as well has made me reassess my relationship with sleep and sleep aids. Sonia's asked a question in the chat. Thank you, Sonia. She's asked, do you have any tips to get back to sleep if you wake up every 90 minutes throughout the night? And do you have any ideas what that 90-minute cycle could be?
We sleep in stages. So we have 4 different types of sleep stages that we go through. I think, I'm not sure, but I would guess that it may be something to do with the sleep stages that you're going through, because I think they may actually last 90 minutes each. So it could have something to do with the sleep stages you're going through and why you're waking up. I don't really know though. The other thing I'd ask is to try to give advice. I'd have to get to the bottom of why you're waking up every 90 minutes. Is it that there's a noise outside that's waking you up? Are you getting up to go to the toilet? Are you just getting up and you don't know why? Are you sleeping with a partner who's disrupting you? Are there noises in the building? I guess it depends. I probably want some more information just to get to the bottom of that. It's a good question though. Ideally, we kind of want to sleep through the night, so these disruptions can be frustrating, obviously, and can get in the way of us getting like good quality sleep through.
Yeah, I guess there's so many factors that you've just mentioned there around what could be interrupting someone's sleep as well. So perhaps it could be helpful to kind of look at all the different factors and see what they could be as well, to help sort of deduce what the issue might be.
That's one of the benefits of having the routine, because if you keep everything the same, it's easier to isolate little things that have actually changed. So for example, if you have the same routine for a week, but you have trouble sleeping on a Wednesday and you notice that you had a stressful day at work that day, it's easier to isolate that. Conversely, you may have found on a Wednesday you slept poorly because you had a coffee in the afternoon, but on the other days you didn't. So that's another benefit of the routine. It helps you to sort of have that consistency, so you can actually isolate and introduce or remove things that might be interfering with sleep.
Yeah, definitely. We've spoken about documenting or keeping a bit of a sleep hygiene diary as well.
Yeah.
Which could be, I guess, another way of helping look at what's routine and what might fall outside of that.
Yeah, definitely.
So I know you already have answered this a little bit, but it came through early in the week and it would be good to kind of tap back into it. What do you do if you're stressed about sleep itself? As a psychologist, someone in our community earlier this week commented that it's just such a vicious cycle that you're stressed about sleep and so then you don't sleep. How do you kind of look at that differently or break that cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of a bit of a paradox in that we spent most of today talking about sleep, the importance of sleep, and how to get better sleep. Um, the first thing I'd say is, at the beginning of my talk, I mentioned how stress can be motivating and helpful to a degree. So the concern that you have about getting good sleep is a good thing. It means you're paying attention to sleep and you're motivated to try to fix it. But like with anything, you can go too far. So the stress that initially motivates you to pay attention and get better sleep is actually the same stress that's keeping you awake. So what I'd say is, use that stress to help you to establish a good routine and then just follow the routine. So rather than going, am I going to get good sleep? I hope I get good sleep. What's the time? Why am I not getting good sleep? Focus your energy instead on, am I following my routine? And in a perfect world, you'd follow the routine, you'd sleep well forever, and then that would be the end of it. But realistically, at least in the beginning, when you try to establish this routine, things may not get better straight away. There may be a few nights when you have poor sleep and it's disrupting and it's frustrating, 100%. The trick, I would say, is much easier said than done, obviously, is to just try to come back to the routine. Rather than getting into the worrying about, am I going to sleep? Is this going to go on forever? Sometimes writing those thoughts down, talking them through with a psychologist, that can help. But what I generally say is just come back to the routine. Like, did I follow my routine today? And if you get better sleep, that's fantastic. And that's the long-term goal. But really the short-term goal is, did I establish my routine and did I follow it? And if you did that, that's a success. Even if you got poor sleep, even if that's frustrating, and it is frustrating, did I follow my routine? So I'd say that put your energy into the routine, not on whether you're getting better sleep, which can sound like a weird thing to say, but that I'd recommend that.
No, it makes a lot of sense, I think, because perhaps, there's an element of reassurance if you know that you've done everything that you possibly can, by checking off that list, whether it's mental or physical around that routine, you can perhaps surrender the rest and realize, you've controlled or tried to control what you can within that.
And there's a satisfaction and pride that you can take in that achievement. Mm-hmm. You've used the discipline to come up with the routine. And number two, ironically, once you surrender, your stress levels drop and it's easier to fall asleep. But it's one of those paradoxes. The more you care and the more you stress, the less likely it is to happen. The best sleep you get is when you don't care about sleep. You're not thinking about it.
Absolutely.
But it's hard to do that. So what I'd say is instead focus on your routine and ideally your sleep will fall in line.
Thanks, Mitch. Another question that's come up that always does when we have these discussions around sleep and especially around routine is, what about shift workers? What can shift workers do when they're not working the same shift every day and they do have very different schedule around sleep? What's your advice for them?
It's tough, isn't it? Because it interferes with the schedule. Look, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be shift work. We'd all be working like the 9 to 5, so we can go to sleep at night and so on. Some people don't have that luxury. What I would say is that try to use the skills that I've recommended to the best of your ability. If you are sleeping first of all, if you can, and you are working shift, like doing shift work, try to get a consistent schedule for as long as you can. If it's possible to just do nights, try to do that. If it's possible to have the same hours for a week long, rather than having like an afternoon, evening, evening, morning, afternoon, evening, evening, morning, try to do an afternoon, evening shift for a week, an evening, morning shift for a week. Just try to get as much consistency and routine as you can, and then follow the other strategies that I suggested.
Okay, great advice.
But that's tough. Like shift work can be tough. Yeah.
It's not ideal, but I guess to make the world go round, and I think especially at the moment, there's probably, there are invariably a lot of people in the medical industry that are doing a lot of shift work as well with what's going on with the current pandemic.
Yeah.
We had a question in relation to diet. So what is the optimal kind of amount of time time a day, to finish eating, and what impact does our full tummy have on our sleep, or empty?
I didn't mention this in the slides, but I think I should have. I don't know if there's any research on the optimal timing for eating, but I personally like to leave about 3 hours between when I finish dinner and when I go to sleep. just so that your body's got enough time to digest things and you can go into just go into sleep. So I'd give it 2 to 3 hours, but I would especially say the same for any sort of fluids. So definitely I wouldn't be drinking anything in the 2 to 3 hours before bed. Ideally, like 3 hours before bed, wouldn't be drinking anything, because you don't want to have that disruption of having to get up to go to the toilet. Although it's fairly normal for people to do that, but if you can cut it back as much as you can, like the less disruptions to your sleep, the better. Yeah.
Okay. Great advice. Thank you. I had a question from someone in our community who may be an athlete by the sound of it, who said, do you recommend that athletes sleep in compression tights, or can this adversely affect the quality of rest?
Interesting. I don't know about compression tights. I would have anything you're wearing that makes you feel uncomfortable has the potential to disrupt your sleep. So I would have thought, sort of in line with what we were saying before about the environment of your sleep, you want it to be as comfortable as possible. But then I guess it depends on what you need the compression tights for. I don't really understand the science behind them. I'm sure there might be a reason for it.
We might dig into that one a little bit more. It's a good question. It's an interesting one. So we'll look into sort of the physical side of things as well there. If you have any more questions, guys, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have a little bit more time to go through them. There's one or two more from our community. I'm going to read one out in regards to melatonin, as in melatonin supplements. What are your thoughts on using melatonin to get to sleep?
First of all, speak to your doctor about this, because they'd be the qualified person to talk about in any terms of substance or medication you're taking. Definitely see a doctor. Number two, I think if you guys are interested in sleep, there's a guy called Matthew Walker. He's a British researcher who lives in the United States, and he's like the god on sleep. Like he's the guy. So I've taken a lot of my stuff, most, if not all of my stuff today from him. So if you're interested in him, check him out. He's got a great book called Why We Sleep, and he goes into melatonin. What he says is, and he's a sleep researcher, so he knows more, is that a lot of the melatonin dosing, or a lot of the melatonin we take, is about 3 milligrams. But he says that the research has been done has actually been on levels much, much lower than that, like 1/10 of that. And ultimately, I think what he's said is that for the most part, it's more of a placebo effect than the melatonin actually doing something. So I think he recommends that if it is working for you, it may not necessarily be that the melatonin is actually doing anything. It's more of a placebo. So yeah, but again, I can't really talk about melatonin dosing because I'm not really that across it. It's more just his opinion. So I would check him out, but definitely talk to your doctor first, because they would be across it too. I think melatonin is more helpful for people who are trying to establish a sleep routine. So if someone's going from a shift work of working evenings and they want to go back to working normal 9 to 5 hours, the melatonin dosing can help with that transition. But once you're in a sleep routine, I don't know if it does much. At least not in healthy younger adults. So over 65, I think melatonin has more of an effect, but in under 65 healthy adults, I don't think it has much of an effect. But again, double check with your doctor, because I'm not entirely sure about that.
Really interesting to know. And thank you for that resource as well. We'll dig up that book and that.
He's awesome. He's great.
Matthew Walker?
Walker, yeah. Walker. Yeah.
Okay, Walker. Okay, and we'll